go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it. So we all got to start working together from this day forward to try to find out who the hell did it.
48 Hours Investigates has acquired these tapes, hours upon hours of footage that take you inside the investigation.
You may have noticed I've spent the last couple of episodes carefully reconstituting the fabric of the Ramsey case. If we stand a chance of solving this case, it's through context and dynamics, and also examining the timeline, not just on Christmas Day and night, but far into the past of this family, as well as into the years following. A great way to frustrate this process, to prevent the case from being solved, is to create random fragments and disconnected rabbit holes to muddle our thought process, creating disconnections and scraps of useless information like the ransom note. Throw in a bunch of near nonsensical movie quotes and you end up chasing your tail for years in an effort to identify the ransom note writer. Can I say something? The who of the ransom note is less important than the why of it. And although I don't think the who is a big mystery, it's, as far as I'm concerned, the least mysterious aspect of the Ramsey case. It's easier to find our way to the who through the why of it than by trying to match handwriting or the disguised psychology of the note itself. What is the ransom note ultimately? True crime pageantry, some of the most ridiculous and over-the-top we've ever seen and perhaps ever will see. But the why of it wasn't ridiculous at all. It was deadly serious, just as a dead child in your home is deadly serious.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Now, in the same way that we may not know how to take the ransom note, many people have no idea how to think about so many aspects of this case: the DNA narrative, the sexual narrative, the neglect narrative, the crime scene apparatus. Is that thing a garrote or something else? If it's something else, what is it? In a very real sense, I think a lot of people come to this case and they take their cue from the Ramseys. The police botched the case. Let's get into that box and just examine it from a police botching the case perspective. But where's that gotten us in 28 years? And bear in mind, all botching included, the grand jury did what they did in spite of all that. And so it doesn't actually rise to the level that you are led to believe it does, given that there was a real outcome. 4 votes for 4 true bills, 4 indictments. That means it was ultimately a successful investigation in terms of an end result. If you want to talk about botching, talk about someone who takes that and then says there's insufficient evidence, and then the true nature of what the grand jury did is buried and it goes nowhere for 13 years. There are so many things in the Ramsey case that if it's not something, it's something else. Well, in the same way, I predict we'll see a bunch of people scoffing at what I refer to as the bicycle narrative. What a silly question to even ask. Did Burke get a bicycle for Christmas? But when you make a serious effort to answer it,
make an effort to answer now.
Something strange comes to light that we haven't seen before. A little boy at Christmas time that's been hidden by the blinding light shining on his sister seems to emerge. What is going on in his head? What is going on in his heart? What is going on in his hands? You know, all of this was true in 1996, and it's still true to this day. This little boy who's hidden by a blinding light shining on his sister. And that's why Burke doesn't even appear in the Netflix docuseries. Many of you ask me to share my theories of this case, and the reason I don't like to do so is because it has to be seen in context to be appreciated, and this is a very sensitive case in a variety of ways. I do think the least sensitive way of approaching this case is by criticizing the police. I think the most sensitive way is by trying to understand the dynamics of this family. Now, I've tried to do that in part with the bicycle narrative. You might say, how on earth do bicycles tell you anything about this family? And actually, it tells you a lot about the family, not only about the family, but also about an aspect to the intruder theory that I think no one has thought about. Of course, if you haven't been concentrating, it's like randomly stumbling upon one of my videos on the Ramsey case and thinking, wow, I don't really understand what's going on. Of course, because you need to see it in context and you need to concentrate on the whole thing, also get to the end, right, in order for them to be able to be stitched together to get an overall sense of what is going on or what could be going on. If you haven't been processing this case in a proper integrated fashion, it's still not going to make much sense to you. So I do recommend you get a notebook, maybe get yourself a TCRS notebook if you're serious about it. Because I do think we can understand and unravel this case, as complicated as it is. We humans can't be told what something is. We have to know what it is experientially, and that takes time. That requires a certain degree of subtlety. And the only way to do that in a narrative sense is to lead you painfully, step by step, through all the evidence, like a trial. And if you can integrate all of it like a jury and reconcile it to a particular result, well, you've solved the case. Isn't that what the grand jury did? If you hold up a fragment, and maybe this fragment makes a lot of sense, but it's still a fragment, but none of the rest does, or it makes sense in an ocean of ignorance, well, you're just fooling yourself. Now, I know what you're thinking. You are such an arrogant know-it-all. I'm pretty sure you don't know it all. And that's precisely how I came to the Ramsey case. Terrified that I didn't know anything, and convinced after all the books, all the documentaries, all the experts, what could I contribute? And so in my first book, I had a few ideas, and they had to do with bicycles. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you very much to those who've left super thanks. Really appreciate it. Again, if you want to do a proper study of this case, and you can do that with me on this channel, feel free to buy one of the TCRS notebooks, and let's get organized in our thinking. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So number one, my original theory. On Christmas, think about this. On Christmas, what's the last thing little children do? What did you do when you were a little child and you'd gotten presents for Christmas? What's the last thing JonBenet did? What's the last thing Burke did? Did you know the last thing JonBenet did on Christmas Day was ride her bike? Now, regardless of what you feel about bicycles, what do you think JonBenet felt about her bicycle on that Christmas Day when she was 6 years old? What do you think it felt like for her to ride her bike, to get a bike on Christmas? Now, in my initial attempt to reconcile evidence and also recognize serious issues in the evidence, the bicycle narrative for me emerged quite prominently. And I seemed to be the first, perhaps the only investigator who went into this seriously. Many thought then, and some still do, that this was a waste of time.
That doesn't mean I'm wrong.
Honestly, Amelia, it might.
My original theory went something like this. Burke didn't get a bicycle for Christmas, JonBenet did, and this upset Burke. Not in a pineapple reaction way, which to me is absurd, but in a deep, wounded sense of a child feeling undervalued and overlooked, not as a single straw kind of scenario, but as a last straw scenario. This child's also overlooked in the sense that his sister is the focus of attention in these pageants. And this bicycle, in a sense, is the straw that broke the camel's back. Now, many people, when they hear this, as I say, scoff, because they're thinking as adults, not as a 9-year-old who really wanted a bicycle. And I know what you'd say, but he got a Nintendo 64. True, but this is Boulder. And by the way, I'm a cyclist, and I've visited Boulder, and I've cycled Boulder's bicycle paths, and I've shopped at University Cycles, the same store that Patsy visited. And let me tell you, not having a bicycle in Boulder is a little like never going to the beach in Malibu, or never walking through Central Park in New York. You're missing the best part. In Boulder, everyone has a bicycle. All the neighborhood kids have bicycles. I actually stayed in someone's home when I was in Boulder, and in the garage, there were just so many bicycles up on the garage wall, easily half a dozen. So I also considered the possibility that the injury to JonBenet's head was made from a fall from a bicycle. And this might even be the sound of metal hitting concrete, that sound that the neighbor Luther Stanton heard late that night after midnight. So can you see what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to integrate evidence in a particular area. And so the question became, did JonBenet ride a new bike at night over a slick lawn or the slippery paving, and she fell against a low wall, this low wall? Look at, it's got quite a nasty edge to it, and it's on a corner. Did she fall in an accident, or did someone push her while she was riding the bike? And this could also account for why Melody Stanton heard the scream, because it happened in the yard outside, and also why the Ramseys apparently did not. Number 2, 400 crime scene photos, but none of bicycles. So you have this theory, and is there any evidence? Is there anything in the statements? Is there anything in the fabric of this case that supports this? And so what gave this theory additional meat was the fact that even Lou Smith found it suspicious enough to bring up during the interrogations. And having made a close study of the crime scene photos, Smith couldn't seem to find any bicycles in them. Number 3, did Burke get a bicycle for Christmas? Given what we know in 2016 and what Burke later said on Dr. Phil that year, the bicycle narrative made sense, because Burke said on Dr. Phil, we both got bikes.
We both got bikes.
Now, my initial reaction to that on Dr. Phil was, yeah, right.
I want to ask you some tough questions, but first, let's turn the hands of time back a little bit. When you look back, was Christmas like a really big deal at your house?
Yeah.
Over time, I've come to believe that Burke did get a bicycle, even though John Ramsey made this cryptic remark to Lou Smith in 1998. Lou Smith said, okay, did you go to the Barn Hills to pick up a bike? And John Ramsey says, yeah, Christmas Eve. We'd given JonBenet a bike. We got Patsy a bike. We were giving Burke a bike, but not that year, which to me sounds like he's saying we didn't give Burke a bike for Christmas. That seems to be contradictory to we both got bikes, doesn't it? And it's very interesting that John volunteers these allocations. We'd given JonBenet a bike, we got Patsy a bike, and we were giving Burke a bike, but not that year. And as soon as Burke gets a bicycle, the mechanism of the crime, a motive for one, dissolves, and you're back to square one.
Wait a sec. You sent them.
Now you might say, hold on, not so fast. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that brings us to number 4, the third photo, right? And that's where you say, maybe there is something to the bicycle narrative. We're just not quite sure what it is. Let's just stay on this and try and figure it out. So another reason to scrap this theory is this photo released in 2021, very late in this narrative. I mean, I am convinced by it, aren't you? In this photo, we see JonBenet sitting happily on her bike. Does Burke seem to have a chip on his shoulder? Burke, to me, doesn't look disappointed, doesn't look resentful in the least. If the bicycle thing was a real issue, to Burke, I think you'd see it on his face in this image. And so that brings us to number 5. So how is the bicycle narrative relevant? Like I say, it may not be. And if it is relevant, it's clearly not relevant in the obvious but wrong one sibling jealous of another's Christmas gift scenario. I think it's a better scenario than being jealous of a piece of pineapple, but I don't think it really works. And so where is my thinking today? Well, I can't prove this, but there does seem to be something hinky, not only with the photographic narrative around the bicycles, but also the narrative around the bicycles, from John, from Patsy, and from Burke. Maybe the bicycle narrative is relevant in some other way, some less obvious sense, some subtle way. Number 6, bicycle tracks in the snow. So if you're saying the bicycle narrative is relevant, but it's not relevant in a sibling rivalry way, well, then what way could it be relevant? Well, this possibly starts to address that question. Now, just to show you the hypocrisy in this case, there's a lot of sound and fury about there being snow or no snow, footprints or no footprints in the snow, but no one disputes the bicycle tracks in the snow. Patsy Ramsey, this is the yard, the front yard. I see tracks here in the snow. Haney, do you know what would have caused that? In other words, caused the tracks. Patsy, I don't know unless Burke rode his bicycle out there. So she's not even saying or suggesting that JonBenet did that. She's thinking that Burke rode his bicycle over the front lawn. Haney, does that look like the right size for that? Patsy, yeah. So Patsy's saying that looks like a bicycle made those marks in the snow on the front lawn. And these are from crime scene photos. Demuth, was he also riding his bike? Patsy, yeah, he would have ridden it. She would not. And I have to say, Patsy's certainty on the subject is quite strange, unless Patsy was very concerned over a 6-year-old's safety, cycling on the front garden. Anyway, she says she was only allowed back on the back, most likely, that alleyway, but he was older and was used to riding a bicycle. And so that also makes you wonder, what other friends of Burke's rode bicycles? Something else to consider is this whole idea is where you say, I think the police botched the case and the police didn't do this right and they didn't do that right. If the narrative was accepted and verified that there was snow and there were no footprints in the snow, there would not have been an intruder theory to begin with, and that was a police narrative. So in effect, the police came this close to basically demolishing the intruder narrative before it even got started. And of course, if you start to play and discount and dismiss and doubt that whole narrative of no footprints because there's no snow, which I don't, but if you do start doing that, then that opens the door to the whole intruder theory. And then I don't think you can blame the police, and I think you're really going down a rabbit hole of your own choosing, because the no footprints in the snow makes it literally impossible for an intruder to levitate into the Ramsey home. And that was an observation made by multiple law enforcement. So if you're going to ignore that and then blame the police at the same time, I think you're applying a double standard. Now, it's also thanks to ordinary photos of the crime scene. Some are police photos, some were taken by the media, that we appear to see these bicycle tracks in the snow. Remember this picture.
Closer, please. Closer.
I think now would be a good time for a loud, ominous banging sound. Number 7. The last thing JonBenet did on her last day was ride a bicycle. I'm a little confused. If we're not going to look at footprints because there's no snow, then why can't we look at bicycle tracks in the snow? Or put it this way, why can we look at bicycle tracks? There's no disputing the obvious bicycle tracks in the snow covering the front lawn of the Ramsey garden. No one argues about that. Couldn't the intruder have arrived by bike and disappeared into Boulder's vast network of bicycle paths? I've ridden them. I've driven by them. I've walked over them as they crisscross the Ramsey turf, as it were. And yet this never, ever comes up. So why, if Christmas photos were deleted or destroyed, what for? If Christmas video was taken of kids getting bicycles, and what could be more warm and fuzzy for a young family than that? And what could be more warm and fuzzy for a young family in Boulder all cycling together? That is, after all, what Fleet White's family were doing. And if it was taken, photos were taken of kids with bicycles, why delete or destroy it? Well, what if there's another scenario? What if the lack of video that morning is that a symptom that some sort of argument or conflagration occurred? Perhaps someone else was there, not an intruder, but a little friend sleeping over. Was there an accident and that someone else left, rode away on a Ramsey Christmas bike to their home just around the corner? And it does seem as though Haney is angling not quite in that direction, but in that general direction when he starts prodding Patsy with some of these questions. And so this raises the question, are the smoke and mirrors around the bicycle narration just another meaningless diversion? Because it could be. Or is there a deliberate effort to hide or disguise not only which bicycle belonged to whom, but how many there were? Even in the former last photo of JonBenet, we see bicycles gleaming in the dark, their owners unknown, the reflector of one shouting out immediately below JonBenet's hand. So what do you think? Is the bicycle narrative important? And did Burke get a bicycle for Christmas that Christmas? I think the answer is yes, Burke did get a bicycle for Christmas. Okay, but then the next question arises. Is there narrative and photographic staging around this question of Burke getting a bicycle for Christmas?
I don't know. Just don't know.
I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.